Thanks for tuning in to this video. For those of you who don't know, I ran this presentation during the Home Finder Expo at KL Convention Center in January 2015, and we uploaded it as a presentation onto our website. But I thought making it into a video would make it more complete, because I can add my notes and my thoughts to the whole presentation. So okay, let's get started. For those of you who don't know, this is a presentation by me, William Lee, from Austral, Australian Property Group, and what we do is we sell Australian property to our clients around Malaysia and different parts of Southeast Asia. Okay, first of all, disclaimer, I'm not a financial institution, so all of this is just general advice, so please don't take it as actual financial advice. We encourage you to speak to a lawyer or an accountant or someone who can actually assist you in actual financial advice. This is all just general advice. So, investing in Melbourne property. Now, if you've never invested in Melbourne property before, we're going to go through a couple of things like why Melbourne, different things about Melbourne, finance, tax, and legal. So let's get started. Firstly, why Melbourne? Now, if you've not seen in the news, Melbourne has been voted the most livable city in the world for the past 4 years. This is a survey run by the Economist magazine. They have a unit called the Economist Intelligence Unit, which does a global survey on the livability of different cities, and Melbourne comes out on top for almost every year in the last few years because of things like the healthcare, education, security, culture, environment, and sport. So that makes Melbourne a hub for people wanting to move there, because they hear that it's the most livable city in the world, and they want to experience it for themselves. So a lot of people do move to Melbourne City. About Melbourne. Now, Melbourne's actually located in the state of Victoria, for those of you who don't know. So the Victorian government runs everything in the state, and Melbourne's actually the main city of the state. It's the second largest city in Australia, just over 4 million people, and 75% of the people living in the state, although it's quite a big state, actually live in Melbourne City. Other things about Melbourne, it's the fastest growing area in Australia, 10.5% population increase from 2012 to 2013, so the numbers are a bit old, but the increase in population was quite a lot since even a few years ago. Districts around Melbourne's central business district, or the city centre, grew by 15%, and this is a statistic from the immigration department, that 65,000 new permanent residents come to Victoria every year, and this is 2011 to 2012. So this number has probably gone up in the recent years. So this is Melbourne city centre, the CBD. It's a rectangle fenced in by the Yarra River, which you can see in the middle of the picture there. Docklands, which is a little harbour, and then the rest of the areas, the inner city areas. So if you've been to Melbourne City before, you will have seen this. The CBD section, there's sections of it where the tram line is actually, it's free to use. So it's something like if you get on at Flinders Street and you take the tram all the way up to Melbourne Uni, just before Melbourne Uni, the whole area is actually free tram rides. It's something to boost tourism in the city and the state. So this is Greater Melbourne. Now, as you can see that the density of the areas that are built up is actually following the coast from Melbourne city centre towards the southeast. And the reason for that is that it's grown in that direction, and the most stable and established suburbs are all towards the southeast. The infrastructure in the west and west of Melbourne city centre is there, but it's a lot more recent, and it's not as well developed as everything going towards the southeast, and that's why you can see that there's so many more locations. Like if you look at the names of the suburbs like Chadstone, Rowville, Ferntree Gully, you can see there's a lot more in the southeast direction than there are west or north or northeast. about Melbourne or Victoria's economy. It's the second largest economy in Australia, accounts for 25% of the country's entire GDP, and the fastest growing sector is the service industry, which is a good thing, because if you're looking to invest in Melbourne property, you want a high concentration of potential tenants, and the service industry is a growing and a very resource heavy one, so there's lots of potential tenants in the state and in the city. Education, for those of you who have kids in Melbourne, you'll know exactly about the education centres like Melbourne Uni, Monash Uni, RMIT, VUT. So 30% of the student population are international students. So Malaysia and Singapore make up something like 50 or 60,000 students, and there's an additional 140 students, 140,000 students who are international students in Victoria. But the point is that a lot of people do go to Melbourne to study. You can just ask around. I'm sure most of you have friends who study there, or have friends who have kids who are currently studying there or going to study there. Historical performance of the property market in Victoria, it goes something like this. Now, the thing you need to know is that the Real Estate Institute of Victoria actually tracks all property sales. Now, what that means is the graph that you see on the screen is actually taken from the Real Estate Institute of Victoria's official website, and you can check every suburb what the price increase has been in the last quarter, the last month, the last year, 10 years, and so on. And over time, the Melbourne's property market is not super aggressive. It's a slow and steady growth. Apartments increase by about 7% per year, whereas houses, they increase by about 8% per year on capital appreciation. Rental yield, of course, depends on how much margin of financing you take, but you can look anywhere from 4 to 5.6% return on yield, depending on the location, the price you bought it, and the type of unit that you get, like 1 bedroom, which is rented out and 2 bedroom units, a landed property, and so on. If you want to check it out, just go to Google, type in Real Estate Institute of Victoria, and you can find out all of these details. So the interesting thing about Melbourne City, if I were to compare it to somewhere like Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, is the occupancy rate. Now, the occupancy rate is the amount of homes that are actually occupied, whether it's owner stayed, whether it's rental, it doesn't matter. There is a way that they can check and track how many people are actually living in all of the units built in the city. And the fantastic thing is that it's something like 96%. In Australia, they calculate it using something called the vacancy rate. So how many units are actually empty? And the current vacancy rate is something like 3.2% in the metropolitan Melbourne, and of course it's a lot lower in regional Victoria. So it's the areas which are much further away from the city. And 3.2%. So if it's 100 units, that means only 3.2 of the 100 units has nobody staying in it. What this means for you as an investor is that if the occupancy rate is something like 96.8%, that means that the rental market is strong. People are actually living in the units that are being built. Now, of course, there will be suburbs where there will be oversupply, like in the heart of the city centre. There's some 90-story buildings, 80-story buildings going up. But if you choose something in a much more sustainable location, like a good suburb or an inner city location, then you're almost certain to get some sort of rental returns, or at least you get a tenant. As a comparison, have a look at the numbers for KL luxury condominiums. The occupancy rate is only 70% or less, which means that most KL luxury condominiums, 30% of all the units, so if there's 100 units, 30% or 30 of them are actually empty. So this is one of the main benefits I feel about investing in Melbourne properties, because of this high occupancy rate, or very low vacancy rate, if you want to look at it the other way around. Regulations. Now, Australia is pro-protecting of the consumer, which is you and me as investors in Melbourne. And let's go through some of them. If you've never bought in Melbourne before, it kind of works like this. The 10% down payment, which is normal. So if you buy an apartment anywhere here in Malaysia or in Australia, 10% is paid at the start of the project. But in Melbourne, in Victoria, this 10% goes into a trust. And this trust is held by a lawyer. It's not the developer's trust, it's a lawyer's trust. The developer can't touch this money. By the Australian regulation, this money can't be touched by the developer. They can only use it upon settlement, which is at the end of the project. So at the end of the project, then only they can draw the 10% down payment you put in, plus the loan that the bank has provided to you, and some developers even pay interest on this 10%. And the reason for this is that they want to make sure that the developer actually has enough money to build the project without using your money first. So it's not going to run the risk of abandoned projects like you do see in parts of Southeast Asia and parts of KL. It's there to protect the consumer. Another thing is, if you're a local developer, an Australian developer, 70% of the units must be sold to locals before the loan for the development kicks in. So why is this a benefit? Now this is a benefit because if 70% of the units are sold to locals, there's a high chance that a portion of them are definitely going to be local investors, but the majority of them are probably going to be local first home owners or second home owners, and they're probably going to stay there. Now, let's just take 50% as a conservative number. So let's say 50% of the 70% are actually people who are living there for their own use. That means that when you rent out your unit upon settlement, you're really only fighting with half of the units. So if there's 100 units, 50 units are going to be stayed there by locals or more for their own purposes, and then the remaining 50% may rent it out. So you're not fighting with the entire building once it comes onto the market. Financing. Now there's this misconception that foreigners don't qualify for Australian bank loans, and that's not actually true. If you try to get a loan locally for an Australian property, in my experience, most of the local banks won't actually even have this loan, won't even have a loan that will be able to finance an overseas property. And if they do, which is usually the international banks based locally, like OCBC or maybe HSBC or one of those international banks, they usually only provide up to 70% financing. However, as a foreigner, you can actually apply for an Australian loan, an Australian dollar loan in Australia, which allows up to 80% financing. Now, although I'm a resident of Australia, I do have an investment property there which I bought as a foreigner, and I have an Australian dollar loan as well. So that's a myth. People think that you can't borrow money from Australian banks as a foreigner, which is not true. Also, they can't really discriminate based on age. So if you're pushing 50, 55, in Malaysia, they will do like 70 minus 55 and say, look, we can only give you a 15-year loan. But in Australia, even people around 50, 55 years old, they can still qualify for 30-year loans. Because in Australia, if you say, look, I can't give you a loan because you're a bit too old, it's a discrimination based on age, and they won't accept that. The current interest rate in Australia is the lowest in history, and it is probably going to go down. Now, I'm not sure when you're watching this video, but it's early April 2015. So the interest rate is currently at the lowest level, and it is predicted to go down. The Royal Bank of Australia has just recently said they're not going to move it down this month, but people predict that it's going to go down so that they can bring the Australian dollar down as well, to keep the economy more competitive, especially the commodities like iron ore and anything that they do in the mining sector. And also currently right now, April 2015, the Australian dollar weakened against the US dollar, but the ringgit also weakened with the US dollar, so we've actually fallen together, and the Australian dollar actually has taken quite a hit. Now, for those of you who've ever sent children overseas, you've known that there's times when the Australian dollar has hit peaks of something like 3.2 ringgit to 1 Australian dollar. So over the long run, the Australian dollar is always stronger than the Malaysian ringgit, and usually by a significant amount. So right now, if you do decide to buy a property, it's actually a great time. Interest rate is low, so you're paying a low interest rate on your loan. The Australian dollar is low, so you can hedge against the weakening ringgit. The ringgit right now to the US dollar is something like 3.7 something to 1 US dollar. So if you protect your ringgit in the form of an Australian property, over time the Aussie dollar is probably only going to go one way, which is upwards. And if it hits 3.2, you could gain another 10% on your investment. Now, another good thing is that Australian loans have interest-only components, meaning that you can have an interest-only loan from the first 5 to 15 years, depending on the bank that you choose, which means you never have to eat into the capital, which as an investment loan, that's a fantastic option. The capital part of your loan is always going to make the monthly repayments very high. But if you take something like a 400,000 Aussie dollar property, the interest only part of that loan may be something like 1,003, 1,004, 1,005, depending on how much financing you get, which means that you have a very real chance to get rental of about the same amount, so that they kind of cancel each other off. Now, of course, it depends if you get an 80% loan, 70% loan, but in my experience, an 80% loan probably gives you net neutral, or maybe you're out of pocket 100, 150, 200 Aussie dollars per month to hold the property, on the condition that you have a tenant, of course. But something like 70% loan and below, meaning 70 or 65 or 60% loan, you will almost always be cash flow positive. And that's including all of the fees that I'm going to go through in a later slide. Other things are tax benefits for foreigners. Now, tax benefits for foreigners are similar to tax benefits for locals. Things like the depreciation of fixtures and fittings over 5 years, like your light fittings, blinds, cupboards, etc., are tax deductibles. You can claim property inspection as a tax deductible. So for example, if you flew to Melbourne, you can only kind of do this once a year, but if you flew to Melbourne, you kept your air ticket, receipt, you kept your accommodation receipts, food receipts, transport receipts, etc. You can actually take all these and pass it to your tax consultant. Your tax consultant can take all this and claim it as property inspection against your home, and use it as a further tax deductible. Borrowing expenses, meaning the interest paid on your loan, is also a tax deductible, and all of this is used to offset your rental income. So realistically, if your rental income is only like $300 or $400 a week, which comes up to like 1,000 something Aussie dollars a month, on paper you're actually making a tax loss. So because you're only making something like 16 to 18,000 Aussie dollars a year in rental, but you're probably paying about the same in interest. Now, if you add on the depreciation of fixtures and fittings and your property inspection and all that, it brings down your taxable amount to what looks like a tax loss, a paper loss. Now, what you can do is you can add up all these. So there's a tax loss every year as you own the property, and every year you can add it up, and if you eventually move to Australia as a new resident, you can use it to offset your first year's income. Or when you eventually sell, you can use it to offset as much of the capital appreciation as you possibly can. So to get the best tax deductibles, you have to hire somebody, a good tax consultant, of course, but you also have to prepare you have to prepare something called a depreciation table, which shows the depreciation of your assets based on those things like fixtures and fittings over something like 5 or 10 years, and they show it. They prepare a document, and you can use this document and submit it as part of your tax filings. Other things, especially for the state of Victoria, it's actually quite pro property investment in terms of stamp duty. Now, in Malaysia, stamp duty is paid at the start. So you pay your legal fees, your stamp duty, your deposit together. But in Australia, the stamp duty is paid at the end. And Victoria has a lot of stamp duty incentives for buying new properties. So take note, it's for new properties, meaning off the plan. So that's the term they use for new properties. It's off the plan. So what it does is it encourages new developers in the state. And what happens is the stamp duty is proportional to the completion of construction, meaning that if, for example, you buy off the plan and construction has not begun, then your stamp duty payable is actually the lowest level possible. So as an example, an apartment which is worth about 400,000 Australian dollars will probably have a stamp duty of anywhere between 15 and 20,000 Australian dollars. So meaning that if you waited for an apartment to be built and you bought it, upon settlement you have to pay your deposit, so 10%, 20%, 30%, whatever it is. Your loan would kick in. On top of that, you have to pay the stamp duty straight to the government as tax. It's a tax. So it's like 15 or 20,000. But if you had bought the same apartment off the plan, meaning like 1 or 2 years before it's settled, then it's only a drawing, or it's only a floor plans, and you buy it straight from the developer off the plan, then your stamp duty is probably only going to be $1,000, $2,000, $2,500, $3,000 at most. So you can see the savings is something like $10,000 to $15,000 in stamp duty savings, which is very significant. That's almost the entire 10% deposit as stamp duty savings, which you pay at the end on top of your loan. So as an example, if it's a building with 100 units and it's not been built, the stamp duty is actually based on the value of the land. So the value of the land divided by 100 roughly. So that's how much you would get. That's how much they would factor for your unit. That's why the stamp duty is only $1,000 or $2,000 when you buy off the plan. So you need to know about certain fees when owning an Australian property, especially one in Melbourne. There's two main fees. Now the first one is body corporate. Now the body corporate fee is pretty much exactly the same as the management fee for condominiums in Malaysia. Now this fee is used to maintain the building that you live in, such as amenities like gym, like your sauna, swimming pool, jacuzzi, paint on the walls, and lifts and landscaping and so on. So that's body corporate. Body corporate is paid quarterly, if I'm not mistaken, and every year you'll be paying it. Now body corporate varies quite a lot depending on how many amenities your building has, but it's anywhere from 1,000 something up to maximum, if you have a really fancy building with lots and lots of amenities, maybe $4,000. Body corporate also is applicable to some landed properties, which shares some certain things like a driveway or shared spaces which needs to be maintained. They also have to pay some sort of body corporate. Gated communities, which are landed properties as well, also have body corporate. They would have shared roads and shared amenities. They have to pay body corporate as well. The second fee you have to pay every year is called council fees. Now council fees are the fees to offset public services like waste removal, waste collection and removal, disposal services, maintaining parks and gardens, planning roads, and so on. So these are where the council fees go to, and they are also charged to you quarterly, if I'm not mistaken, and it's anywhere from $1,000 to $3,000 a year, depending on which council you live in, because there's lots of councils in Melbourne. Now these fees are paid by you, the landlord, not by your tenant. Your tenant only has to pay for the fees like electricity and internet and your rental, and in fact some water fees are passed to you as well. So you as the landlord will have to pay body corporate, council fees, and sometimes water fees as well. Conveyancing. Now I've just gone through some of the things about the benefits of buying in Melbourne, but now we go to the actual process of buying in Melbourne. Now conveyancing is basically legal representation. So it's the process of transferring ownership of a legal title of land, which is your property, from one person or entity to another. So what that means is it's the process of transferring ownership from the developer, which owns the title of the land, to you when you buy it. These conveyancers don't necessarily have to be lawyers, but usually are. They prepare, clarify, and lodge legal documents such as your contract of sale, memorandum of transfer, and essentially they are the protection between you and the legal representation of the developer. They put the deposit money in a trust account. Usually that's done by you. They calculate the adjustment of rates and taxes, and when you settle the property, they act on your behalf. They advise you when the property is going to be settled, contact your bank or financial institution when final payments are being made, and basically they represent your interest with a vendor or their agent. So basically they represent you against the developer, which is referred to usually as the vendor. Visas in Australia. Now, if you are a foreign buyer, you do not need to have a visa to buy Australian property. There's no special visa required for you to buy Australian property. You can buy fully as a foreign investor. However, they will ask for something called the FIRB, or the Foreign Investment Review Board. It's a simple application which basically tells the Australian government what you're going to buy. Because as a foreigner, which I'll go through, you can't actually buy sub-sale or secondary market property. You actually have to buy new. So I get asked this question a lot, but buying property in Australia does not necessarily qualify you for an Australian residency. Now, there are visas out there which required you to buy a couple of properties as part of some sort of financial investment, but I'm not that familiar with those. But in most cases, if you buy one apartment, or if you buy 2 or 3 or 4, it still doesn't mean you qualify for a residency, and it doesn't actually improve your chances of getting a residency either. Like I said, foreigners must sell their property back to a resident, meaning that a foreigner can only buy new property, not sub-sale, and then when they want to sell it, they have to sell it back to a resident, meaning foreigners cannot flip the property to each other, because that will encourage too much speculation. So you imagine if a foreign buyer from Malaysia buys it 5 years ago, sells it 5 years later to another Malaysian, and that Malaysian does the same thing and keeps flipping and flipping, there'll be a lot of speculation in the market. Permanent residents qualify for first home buyers grant, which foreigners don't. Now, this basically is a grant from the government to help you pay partial amount of your deposit as a first home buyer, but you need to live in the home. So if you buy an apartment and you're a resident and you want to use the first home owner's grant, you have to live in it for 6 months or 12 months or whatever the regulation is, which changes quite often, so you want to check that. Permanent residents can sell and buy property to anyone. So permanent residents can buy off the plan, they can buy sub-sale, they can buy whatever they want and sell to whoever they want. Technically, they can't sell to their used property to foreigners, but that's an issue with the FIRB. But yeah, technically they can't sell to foreigners. But there are lots of cases where it does happen, which is why the FIRB is trying to clamp down hard on it. So as a resident, if you are a resident, don't sell your second-hand property to a foreigner. It's just going to get you in a bit of trouble. Property management. Now, as an investor, as a foreign investor especially, you do not have time to manage your property actively. So that's where property management comes in. Now, property managers, especially the ones that we use for our projects, they have to find a tenant for you. So what they do is, even before the unit is ready, they will fit out a show unit. So they will go and furnish one of the units in the apartment, bring potential tenants and say, look, your apartment's going to look something like this. They'll advertise it in websites like realestate.com.au, domain.com.au, where locals search for rental properties. They shortlist, they filter tenants, they send you the shortlisted tenants, say, would you like tenant A or would you like tenant B? This is their background, this is how much they're willing to pay for rent. They even inspect your unit and take the keys for you upon settlement if you are not free to do so. So my property manager, what they did was they took the keys for me, inspected the unit. They put those little blue sticky tapes on the walls to say, oh, there's defects here, there's defects here, there's defects here, and they even took a video of it. So they videoed it for me and said, have a look at your apartment. These blue little sticky tapes are highlighting the issues we found with the apartment. We're going to record it and we're going to report it to the developer so that they can get it fixed. What they do is, how they work and how they make their money is they collect rental from your tenant, and they take their 5 to 7% fee, which is their property management fee, and with the remainder they can actually use it to pay fees for you. So body corporate, council rate, water rate, whatever fees are charged to you, which is sent to them, they can say, would you like us to pay for it? If you say yes, they take the rental, they take their cut, they use the rest to pay off these fees, and whatever remainder is left, they bank into your account. And so basically they take all of the hassle of managing your property completely out of your hands. And in my experience, through the investment that I have, and through some of my associates and family members, we found that our units are barely ever empty. So 1 year tenancy agreement, if the tenant decides to move out, the time taken between that and the next tenant is usually within a matter of a week or two weeks max. So one of the units that we have in Chapel Street in South Yarra, it's been rented out for 3 years straight, with a total of 2-week gap in total across the 3 years. So you can see that these property managers, they can do their job really well. They can advertise, they take professional photos of your unit, they bring and show people there, and they essentially take care of everything for you. The last thing I'd like to talk about before we end this video is actually the purchase process. Now, this is the full purchase process if you ever were to buy a property from our company, through our company, or if you were to buy it straight from a developer. So what happens is things like you reserve a lot and a booking fee. So just like in any apartment purchase, you look for the unit that you like, you fill in your reservation form, and you place a booking fee. Now the booking fee is usually around 1,000 Aussie dollars, and in our case we collect something like 3,000 ringgit, we convert it to 1,000 Aussie dollars, and we actually send it off to the developer. The developer needs some sort of monetary transaction to make a document or booking form legal. So they take 1,000 Aussie dollars, and then the contract is issued. Now the contract is issued by the agent that you're buying from. So in our case, we prepare the contracts, the developer sends the soft copy to us, we get it printed out, and we sit with you and we sign the contracts. Once the contracts are signed, within 7 days usually, 10% of the deposit must be paid. So if we start from here, if it's a unit which is $400,000, you just put $1,000 booking fee, fill in the booking form, send it to the developer. The developer will remove your unit from public sales. Contracts are issued by us or by your agent, then they're signed by you. And when I say signed, if the contract is 150 pages, usually you have to initial every single page. That's just how it's done there. If it's under 2 names, both of you must sign every single page of every single copy. The 10% deposit is paid within 7 days of you signing the contract. The contract is usually sent to Australia, and it's always sent to Australia, in fact. So once you sign it, we take it, we DHL it to Australia, and the developer receives it. Your 10% is sent by TT, or however, if you have funds in Australia or if you have funds here. It doesn't really matter as long as the 10% deposit is paid within roughly 7 days of the contract being signed. And the contract is signed by the developer on their side and scanned, and the signed pages from the developer signs the pages that you also signatured, and they scan and send it back to you. Now at this point here, there's 2 green circles you can see here. Now at pretty much any time you can engage a conveyancer, which is the legal representation. Usually you do that at the start of a process so that they can check through the contracts for you, make sure everything is okay. But sometimes they come in later parts of the process. But usually they start somewhere near the beginning. Now, after the 10% deposit is paid, you can apply for FIRB if required. Some developers have already applied for the entire building on your behalf, but for some units or some property, you might have to apply it for yourself. And it's just a form. It's just a simple form saying what unit are you getting, what's the address, what are your details, how much are you paying for the unit, and so on. Now, anywhere from 3 to 6 months before a property is settled, you are required to start applying for your loans, and your property is inspected by valuers. But basically the most important part is here, where loans are applied for. So at this point, usually in our process, we introduce our clients to our mortgage brokers. These mortgage brokers have access to 15, 20 different banks, different bank branches, and so on. And their job is to find you the best loan deal possible. They find you the best loan deal, and they don't charge you for it, because if they push the loan through, you agree to it with whatever the banks that they recommend, the bank actually pays them commission. So they essentially work for you for free. And there are different levels of mortgage brokers. Some are a bit more aggressive with much more creative loan capabilities, and some are more conservative, with more regular loan options. So it's 3 to 6 months before your property is settled. You start applying for your loans. Upon settlement, you get the keys handed over to you, and at this point your property manager comes in. They have probably started showing people around the units in your building, and are already in the process of filtering a tenant for you. They also receive the keys, check for defects, and send you the details. Also send to the developer what are the defects that they've checked. So that's actually the whole purchase process. It's actually pretty straightforward if you deal with the correct people. If you deal with companies like my company, where we've set up the back-end processes in Australia for you, you essentially only really need to come up with the down payment and sign the documents, and everything else is handled for you by the appropriate people in Australia, like your legal representation, like your conveyancer, mortgage brokers, and so on. So the purchase process is actually very straightforward. Nothing to be overly worried about. That's actually the entire presentation I have today. Now, if you'd like more information, you can contact me personally at the number there, +6018 2388 972, or you can email me at william.lee@australproperty.com. I encourage you to go to my website, australproperty.com. Check us out on Facebook at fb.com/australproperty, and interact with us whatever way possible. Share this video with your friends, and if you'd like to have a meeting with me in my office to find out any general information about Australian property, Melbourne property, or the purchase process, feel free to contact us, and we can always set up a meeting. So I hope you enjoyed this presentation in this video format. I hope it gave you a bit of insights on buying property in Australia, especially in Melbourne, and that it's not actually such a difficult process. Before I leave, I'll let you see some of the fancy, nice, clear pictures of Melbourne City. So on New Year's Eve, to try and compete with Sydney Harbour Bridge, which has that fantastic fireworks display, a lot of the buildings in Melbourne actually shoot off fireworks, so it looks something like this. This is Brighton Beach, where people go and relax on the weekends, and you can actually buy one of these houses. It's pretty expensive, but it's actually basically a shower hut where you can change and store stuff. This is the Botanical Gardens and the Shrine of Remembrance in the city. This is Flinders Street Station in the heart of the city. Victoria has beautiful vineyards. I believe this is the Yarra Valley, or one of the Yarra Valley vineyards. This is the 12 Apostles. Now, 12 Apostles are named 12 Apostles because there used to be 12 of these standing stones around, but now I think there's only like 5 or 6. It's along the Great Ocean Road if you ever are in Victoria. And I think this is the National Library. You can see one of the City Circle trams, which is a free tram which takes tourists around the city. This is Melbourne City at night. So I hope you had a insightful presentation, and I hope you enjoyed the video. And I'll be in touch. Register for our newsletter as well if you can, and have a good day or good evening ahead. Thank you very much.